These are people that are operating, in a world where they believe that, the elections are stolen here and that, the Anchorage Assembly is all a bunch of they're self-dealing and enriching themselves through, I'm not entirely sure what method.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Today, we begin our exploration of the private Facebook group Save Anchorage. These staunch Bronson supporters dominated the mass debate last fall and are currently fielding viable candidates in all our upcoming assembly and school board races. Here to talk about it is independent reporter for the Midnight Sun blog and newsletter, Matt Buxton. He is one of the most prolific journalists working in Alaska today and also hosts his own podcast with Pat Race called Hello Alaska. Matt Buxton, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, great to be here.
Matt, I just wanted to get a little bit of your background. Where are you from?
So I'm originally from Oregon. Where in Oregon sort of depends on who's asking, but I grew up between Bend and Portland. Bend in Oregon, and then I went to school in Lincoln, Nebraska, of all places. So, go Big Red, and then found my way up to Alaska after that, yeah.
And did you always want to be a journalist?
In school, I was really good at math and science, actually, and I kind of wanted to challenge myself. And I knew that writing was difficult, and I actually really wanted to really liked being a photographer, actually, and that's what I went to school for. And then partway through, realized that being a professional journalist, photojournalist, was not going to ever pay the bills. So I decided to the illustrious and lucrative career of being a print reporter instead.
Is that what you did when you got to Alaska?
Yeah. After college, I did a fellowship in Berkeley where I did reporting on the criminal justice system in California, and then did a fellowship. I think it's called a resident intern, which was just a fancy word for we're really going to take advantage of you, at the Oregonian for about a year after that. In Portland, Oregon, and then, which I thought was going to be a dream, and it really kind of wasn't. And then the opportunity came up in Alaska, and moved up and did that.
So you have kind of an interesting independent journalism thing going on with the Midnight Sun. How did that come about?
So I worked at the Fairbanks Daily Newsminer for about 7 years when I moved here. That's what I originally moved up for Alaska for. It was an interesting job. I was kind of chasing a girl at the time, and then that didn't end up working out, unfortunately. And fortunately, I really fell in love with Alaska and fell in love with the legislative coverage. And how can I do more political coverage? How can I do more? I really always have liked the idea of public policy and how that works and how a bill gets passed and all. Like, I love the boring agendas in our lives. I covered the Fairbanks North Star Borough Assembly for a long time, and I found it was after the 2016 election when Trump got elected. I started feeling a little frustrated with the traditional bounds of, being a sort of centrist reporter or, being a reporter. And I think I felt strongly that there is this sort of idea of false equivalency in the media. And so opportunity came along to take over the Midnight Sun. So to be clear, there's a publisher that owns it, Jim Lotzfeld. He's a lobbyist, sort of political guy. He sort of seems to do a little bit of everything. And so he owns that. So I do the blog through a contract, and it's been a really great experience. He called me up one day and asked if I wanted to do something. He was interested in doing something like this, and I didn't really know too much about him, and he didn't seem to know too much about me. But we had a brief conversation about some of our kind of the way we see the world, and it worked out. And frankly, I was really wary, I think, a little bit about it, just because it's such a different model than what we are used to with journalism. For me, it's been really freeing. Jim doesn't have any day-to-day say. I get a text from him maybe once every 3 months, and it's, hey, the website's down, and that's about it. And it's been really great. I think the new model, an emerging model, is Patreon and sort of patronage politics. And you kind of look back too, like a long, for the last centuries, right? And there sort of has been a history of people who in the community who've got the resources, who are value this kind of thing existing and help take care of it. And so I've been doing that, and I keep on doing freelance work here and there. And then we launched the Midnight Sun Memo newsletter about a year ago, and it's been going great.
Okay, Matt, Save Anchorage. What is Save Anchorage, and why do we need to know?
From the really basic viewpoint, it is a Facebook group that is now closed, that we don't have a particularly good insight into anymore. In a bigger sense, it's this like really virulent, quote unquote, grassroots right-wing political effort in Anchorage that has, I think it's impossible to really separate it from a lot of what else is going on right now in the country as far as the political motivation on the far right when it comes to COVID. It's February 10th right now and we're recording this. Today, the House Military and Veterans Affairs Committee held a very lengthy hearing on the Oath Keepers. I think there's just a lot of ways where those two things sort of mesh together, which is basically there's long been sort of anti-government, sort of conspiratorial factions out there, to say the least, that I think were really sent into overdrive
during the pandemic. I think that there was this sort of almost violent backlash to the mandates. I think it really blossomed sort of wickedly with a lot of coronavirus conspiracy theories, with the election conspiracy theories, with all these sort of different things that kind of all sort of created this perfect storm of like anger, right? Save Anchorage quickly became the organizing place to oppose, the leftists, right? That were ruining this city, and look at these kind of milquetoast health mandates that they're shutting businesses down. And so, it was an organizing point, but it was also, a place of rampant, misinformation and disinformation about what's going on. The most sort of simple terms on the other end, it's this alternate reality, I think, that has sort of been created within our community that has enough followers and enough sort of energy behind it that it's almost its own reality at this point. These are people that are operating, in a world where they believe that, the elections are stolen here, and that, the Anchorage assemblies all a bunch of they're self-dealing and enriching themselves through, I'm not entirely sure what methods. I think it's really difficult to sort of grapple with for sort of the traditional political things. But one of the really important things that I want to talk about as far as this hearing today in the legislature about the Oath Keepers, which is this whole, it's about David Eastman in the legislature and right-wingers and white supremacists and all this sort of stuff. But one of I think the really key points there, and I think that applies here, is that the foundation is sort of built around an alternate reality of where, the everyone's stealing money from you, all this sort of stuff and they're violating the law and they're violating the Constitution and they're just tyranny. It's, I think, and I listened to some stuff in advance for this. I think I heard words like the demonic press and the cold civil war. It creates really this sort of alternate reality that serves as a permission structure to be awful. The city was truly stealing from you, was truly tyrannical. It really wanted just to muffle kids and do all this sort of stuff. Like some of the reactions that are grown out of it, the anger that you saw at these masking hearings almost makes sense, right? Like you're going to battle against this tyrannical, horrible, evil government that is out to get you at every turn, and the lies and the misrepresentations in here feed into that anger, and sort of becomes a big feedback loop. And I think that's what's really interesting about it. The researchers today were talking about there was a number of like just kind of everyday people that got swept up into January 6th. They truly believe that they were saving the country from tyrannical leftists who want to instill Marxism. And it's like you listen, and it's the wild thing is that it's so difficult, I think, to really grapple with for a lot of people, is just that the reality that they're arguing against is so different than the reality that we are living in. The way they talk about the health mandates is like, I have to like step back and be like, wait, do we want to shut down the schools? Do we want to like, didn't think we did. I thought we all wanted to get through the pandemic on, in one piece. I thought we all wanted to like care about each other and get through it.
I'm going to try to make an awkward segue, but I think it's an important one that'll kind of get us into an important area. And that is the de facto leader of Save Anchorage is Assemblymember Jamie Allard. When I listened to Dan Fagan's show last Friday and he had her on the show, his introduction to her was that she is their biggest hero and truly the one person in Alaska who could do whatever she wants. Be the mayor, be governor, the sky is the limit. This sort of overwhelming upswell of hagiography, like the Saint Jamie Allard coming from Dan Fagan. I think to those of us who have been to all these assembly meetings, hearing that was just shocking. What are your thoughts on leader Jamie Allard?
Well, so, I think we talked a little bit about the polarization, right? I think I would argue that the one thing that I think everybody would want is a fair system, free of hypocrisy in our leaders, right? I think you can look at all sides and see some level of hypocrisy in there. But, for Allard, it's just wild to me. I think that there's two different pictures being portrayed. There's what we see with your eyes and then what you hear through Dan Fagan's lens. And, I don't watch a lot of the hearings. I'll preface it with that first, it looks to me like somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. Right. And so this idea that, she's being painted as the next mayor, to me, is laughable. I'd rather have 4 more years of Dunleavy, because at least he seems to like get the ropes of it. So there's that. And I think, my introduction to her was this wildly detached, like from reality, defense of these Nazi license plates, right? How willing somebody is to lie about stuff, right? Because I think, and misrepresent it, because it was so clearly a Nazi reference. It was so clearly what ought to have been an easy layup for everyone to condemn. But I think what we saw is just a level of political opportunism that I think is, really disheartening, right? I think, we could definitely be more critical of people on the left that engage in similar sort of, going with however the wind blows. But man,
I want to speak a little bit about that. I think that impression that she doesn't know what she's doing on the assembly is appealing to people who don't understand how an assembly meeting works. And Joelle Hall had spoken to us about a while back about how there is an impenetrability of assembly meeting process, a level of complexity that makes it really hard to read that agenda, to understand what is happening at the meeting tonight. And that inscrutability of what's happening in front of you causes the person on the other side, the person who's not up on the dais, to feel unequal. Like they have some like crazy knowledge to understand what's happening and I don't. And so I think when they see someone who also doesn't seem to get it, there's a relationship. They're like, well, she doesn't get it either. Yeah, this is impossible.
I think that the masking fight was a really great example of that's like it's cultivated. Like I think her image of not knowing what's going on and being angry about all this stuff is a cultivated and sort of intentional sort of look. And I think you're right. It plays well. And especially it plays well because, I think I've tuned in at times where she's like, well, could we hear the last 2 people in line? They've been waiting for an hour. And then you have someone stand up and go, well, what does our charter say? And it's like, you just lost the argument right there. She might not have a great handle of it, but I think she's got a better handle of the political situation, especially the Save Anchorage, that far right political situation, than anybody else in the room does. She basically knows how to, she's like a conductor almost. On that level, she's beaten everybody at the game, right? I think there are times where, I think that the progressive members on the assembly are their own worst enemies. I think that you look at some of the way that they handle the meeting and some of the ways that they approach things where you go, shoot, let's recall them. Let's get them all out of here, because they sound, uptight. They sound holier than thou. I think there's a lot of that sort of stuff that I think 100% feeds into that kind of anger that I think, Jamie Allard harnesses well, right? I think she gives them direction and gives them area. I think that's what is difficult though about it. What is when I say, hypocritical and stuff, is that, yeah, there are places, where, the transparency could be better, but, so much of it, of what is going on is like, instead of being in service of, a fair, equitable process, is just there to rack up more political points within that realm. If political success was defined solely by, how Save Anchorage or whatever beholden audience you have feels, then great. But it doesn't, I don't see how any of it really moves us as a city forward, right? There's no equitability, there's no fairness, there's no opportunity in a lot of this. And that's what I think, for me, I find so frustrating and so difficult with it, is that, it's almost creating drama and angst and division for the sake of it, right? And I think it's useful to have a side to direct your anger, right? So it's like, you look at the elections that are coming up. If the Bronson side gets their way, there would be much more, Jamie Allard types on the assembly. And my question is like, what's the end goal in that? Is that more no bid, no oversight contracts? Is that, what is the end goal there?
I think the end goal, you've got, this is really comes down to Trump and the big lie, that you have one party that is willing to accept a loss in an election and another party that isn't. And I think that we see that at a local level, Bronson wanting to have the municipal clerk be an elected position, trying to get control of the election, because I think it was Stalin who said it doesn't matter who votes, it matters who counts. Getting the counter in place to create sort of a one-party rule. Dan Fagan speaks about this yesterday on his show, was talking about how it's fine for people, like he was talking about a certain assembly member that he doesn't like. He's like, it's fine for this type of person to exist, just as long as they never have power. And, the point being like, we're okay with the other side existing. They just cannot be in government. And I think that is kind of the end goal. The end goal is to create an environment in which people with expertise, people with experience won't have a shot, because that won't be the deciding factor. It will be loyalty to the party, loyalty to the leader. I do think, it sounds like I'm talking about like Soviet Union, yeah, but that is kind of what I see.
It is. Oh, it's totally what it is. And that I think to me is what is so
dark about all this, right? That that is the sort of the glint that we saw in the masking mandate, was that there was a overarching like threat of violence. Yeah, it was a threat of violence, and I think that it's this sort of willingness to break the rules as long as it's the side that's right, or the side that you believe is right. And I think the legislature's doing a lot of talk about. There's a good hearing this week about Governor Dunleavy's veto of their per diem, right? And one of his members was talking about, well, he vetoed it because you guys didn't do what he wanted. And it's a repeat of the governor's veto, basically, of the court system over an anti-abortion ruling that he didn't like, that is sort of breaking the rules. It is interfering with a separate, co-equal branch of government because they're not acting the way you want them to. And that is such a fundamental, to me, like, violation of how things are supposed to work. You look at the Anchorage Assembly, right? There's a huge battle over the security in the room, huge battle over the plexiglass, all the meeting feed, all that sort of stuff. And to me, I think it totally speaks to this sort of totalitarian, sort of strong arm thing where it's like, if it seems like if Bronson gets his way, might as well just get rid of the assembly, right? Might as well just have a king. You might as well, and same with Dunleavy, right? Might as well just get rid of the legislature and get rid of the courts and just let Dunleavy do what he wants. And I think that is so foundational to where this is going right now. And it is enabled by this, this sort of line about, the lawlessness and the tyranny of the left, and that, frankly, the left sometimes, gives them reason to believe it, I guess. This week, also, there's the State of the Judiciary. Chief Justice Daniel Winfrey delivered it. He's the first Alaska-born Chief Justice. And it was the 50th State of the Judiciary. And he was reflecting on how, 50 years ago, there was all this sort of political division and uncertainty and young people who didn't know their place in the world. And he was a young person back then. And now he's part of the establishment. His kind of core message there is, the reason basically, like, we've gotten through all of this. We've gotten through the good governors, the bad governors, the indifferent governors. We've gotten through, all sorts of different flavors of the legislature and attitudes in the budget and all that sort of stuff. But we got through it because of the foundation that we've set, right? Which is, the legislature is, the appropriate, the assembly, is the same thing, is, the lawmaking group, the administration, is executive branch. They're tasked with, carrying out the policy, and the judiciary is there to basically call balls and strikes, right? And on both levels, they're, on the state level and on the Anchorage level, you're watching very quickly an erosion of those kind of norms. And as having a assembly that is not fully locked up with the mayor is a good thing.
Big thanks to Matt Buxton, not only for being on the show today, but for his incredible output of high-quality journalism. If you haven't already subscribed to the Midnight Sun memo, head over to themidnightsunak.com and sign up. Big gratitude to Corey Coolidge for making this podcast listenable. We continue today's conversation in March with two experts on the group Save Anchorage, community organizer and original Save Anchorage member, Yarrow Silvers, and the anonymous blogger, The Blue Alaskan. But next week, we have a very special episode with the founders of the Alaska Coalition of BIPOC Educators, Danielle Kemp and Rosalind Weich. They discuss their backgrounds and why they stepped up to advocate for better racial representation and curriculum in our school district. Please tune in.